So Pawan Gill is, she is the Health Equity Manager at Current Health Systems. Most recently, she has served as the Director of the HRTP and Workforce Development for Kern Community College District. She was also Kern County's first Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is a seasoned leader who has over 20 years of experience working in multiple sectors, including education, healthcare, and government. Pawan is a double alumni of CSUB and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications as well as a Master's in Public Administration. She is active in the community, serving on multiple boards and commissions, including the leadership Bakersfield Advisory Council, Bakersfield Sikh Women's Association, Current Economic Development Foundation, and the Bakersfield College Foundation. So it's a privilege to have Pawan here to lead us through our next session. Thank you, Pawan. Let's welcome her.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Apologize for being late. Apparently, I'm more accomplished than I am a good driver. So one of the things that we realized is when we started doing these series of sessions is one of the things that we didn't cover was the absolute basics. And how many of you guys have attended a DEI training? And okay, how many of you guys have heard about the terms DEI? Right? I mean, over the last couple of years, I would say, especially after the murder of George Floyd, organizations had to take notice. It could no longer be something that's swept under the rug, not talked about. And I think there was a very strong push for organizations to acknowledge that there are differences in our workplace, there's differences in society, and that we need to be able to talk about them in an open fashion. And so that's where we've really seen this push for DEI to become a little bit more formalized. So about today's agenda, I'm going to give you some background. We're going to start with some definitions because a lot of people talk about these things in different ways. So we're going to go through understanding DEI vocabulary. We're going to talk about unconscious bias, microaggressions, and then we're going to look back and reflect. And we're going to say, what can we do in our organizations, in the community to where we can have a better outcome for all people. So to start with the definitions, when you think about diversity, what do we think of? And feel free to just yell out. Different backgrounds, right? A lot of time, if I want to say, what is the diversity in our room? What would we look for, right? We might say, okay, how many men versus women? How many Indian people do we have? How many Black people do we have? How many Hispanics do we have, right? And we want to say, like, who's different? What is the representation in the group? And I'm going to challenge you to expand that idea because those identities are one part of who we are, right? But is it everything? Is the fact that I'm a woman everything to tell you about what my thoughts and perspectives might be? No. So when we're going to talk about diversity, we're going to talk about diversity in terms of representation of identities, but multiple identities and ideas within an organization. And that's where, as we go through this, I really want to push that diversity is strength because it's strength in, it is a diversity of ideas. And the more ideas we have in an organization, the more innovative we are. The next is equity. And equity is about eliminating systemic barriers and privileges and ensuring that all people have fair access to opportunity, resources, and the power to thrive. And we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these later. And then we have inclusion. And inclusion is about creating an environment in which all individuals feel valued and connected. It's one thing to say that, oh, okay, we're all in a group together. And it's another thing to feel being a part of that group. And that's what we're talking about in inclusion. So as I was kind of talking about diversity a little bit before, in the context of organizational diversity, we're referring to the variety of people, perspectives, and ideas within an organization. So when I'm standing in front of you, you might see a female. You'll say, okay, let me guess about where-ish her age is gonna be, and I'm not gonna throw it out there for anyone. But you can give a range, right? You can say, okay, so she'll probably be about this generation. This is the music she probably listened to. And you can just start making some stereotypes and then, based on who you're in front of you. But what that misses is maybe the background, where I grew up, right? So am I a first generation immigrant? There's so many other parts of my identity that would help shape who I am, how I think, who I interact with, where my relationships are. There's so many different aspects of my identity that you can't physically see, but that contribute to the way that I think and the ideas that I bring, the perspectives that I might bring into a meeting. You don't know what my family may or may not have been through, right? Maybe I have a family member who has had a substance abuse problem. So in that case, I might have some perspectives on dealing with populations with substance abuse that somebody else may not have. And that's where this diversity of perspective and experiences becomes extremely important. We're also talking about job level. How many times, how many of you guys are out in the community, in the field every day? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of you guys sit in an office for the majority of the day? How many are doing phone calls with patients directly from that office? Okay, how many times do your perspectives differ from administration? Right? It happens all the time because your experiences on a day-to-day basis are different than the person that might be. Both experiences are extremely valuable. Both are needed for better outcomes. But what we do and who we are on a daily basis really impact the way we are going to look at certain issues. And that's what this diversity, I want you to go beyond thinking of just what stands right in front of you, but really look at people to kind of think, what other experiences, what other perspectives does this person bring to a table so we can have more of an appreciation. The next is equity versus equality. Does anyone want to try to interpret this picture for me? And be free. I mean, this is a training thing, right? So, yes.
Different people need different levels of help.
That's right. So with equality, if you see over here, we're treating everybody the same, right? But what happens in equality? If there's been a systemic differences in the way people are treated, the opportunities that were afforded to someone, does equality work? No. All it does is reinforce the same inequities that existed. Those barriers continue to be there, right? And the advantage continues to grow. So it's hard to ever close a gap. When you look at equity, what equity does is it acknowledges that not everyone's experience has been the same. Not everyone has had those same opportunities. So what are we going to do? How are we going to help close these gaps? And a lot of people take, offense to the word equity. When you say, oh, I do equity work in the community, and especially, let's say in Kern County, not particularly well received. As the first director of DEI for the county, they didn't want it to go to the news. And when somebody said, hey, we wanted to interview you, they said, yeah, why don't we hold off on that? And our PR rep's going to do it. And we just don't want to talk too much about it. Why? Because it makes people uncomfortable, because it makes us confront our truths that we have not always been in equitable society. And so when we're talking about equity, equity is not the goal. The goal is liberation. So for anybody that has heartburn over the word equity, I encourage you to join the movement. Let's bring everyone up and let's get to a point where the barriers are removed for everyone. And there's a true equal playing field and we're all able to, work to our most potential. So the end goal, right? Not equality, not equity, but it's inclusion and belonging. And when all of the organizations that launch DEI initiatives, when we think about our community, we think about what is our end goal? Our end goal is creating an environment where people feel valued and they feel connected. And when you are looking for engagement, whether it be in a committee you serve on, or if you are at work in your organization, when a person feels like they are valued and respected and they belong, they feel that their ideas are considered, you will have higher engagement, higher innovation, and ultimately better outcomes. So this is a slide that, especially a couple of years ago, we always had to make the case, right? Why should the county or why should anyone invest in DEI, right? My first thought on that, and it always made me not want to include it, is the fact that this is value-based work as well, right? What do you fundamentally believe in as a person? And based on the work that you all are doing in the community every day, I have a feeling our values would probably be pretty aligned anyways, right? You are in it to serve people. You are in it to serve all people. And I applaud you for that. And actually, you guys give yourselves a round of hand, a round of applause for what the work you have committed to. But then there's organizations that say, well, what's our ROI on this, right? And this is the business case for DEI. And research shows that organizations with inclusive culture are 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets. Now, imagine what that means for nonprofits, right? Do we have a lot of money, extra money sitting in our pockets? Right? We're not even worried about getting, the most bang for our buck, but we're trying to figure out how can we be effective? How can we make an impact to the populations that we're serving? And if you are 2 times as likely to meet or exceed a financial target, imagine what this means in terms of impact. You are 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times as likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. And again, remember, we can remove the word business for this group. And you know that if you can give your populations 8 times better outcomes, why would we not embrace this model? How many of you have heard the term implicit bias? I am very glad that we should have started university with this. Next time around, this is going to be the first thing that we do. Okay, we can play this video. Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias. 2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debate, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes the shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racism.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive. and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll host a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Oh, okay, perfect. She's like, no. Well, I thought we were on a roll. Okay, so the reason I love that video is it just simplifies it, right? There's so much complex language that we start using and trying to talk about different concepts. But at the end of the day, you know, we all are biased people. And there's a lot of people like to say, oh, well, no, you know, I have a good filter on this. But I'm a person who has been doing learning and development for over 20 years. I have done multiple classes on implicit bias, all sorts of DEI related training. I am biased. The day that I come in front of you and I say that, oh, I don't have this, I can tell you, just boo me out of here and make sure we never end up on an agenda again. Because human beings by nature are biased. And there's nothing actually wrong with it if we learn how to operate with it. So when we think about bias, people think, oh, it's a bad word, right? Like, oh, we're inclined towards something. But our brain uses two thinking systems that operate simultaneously, right? Every day when I'm walking, if just from here to my car, there's going to be things that are going to happen where my brain has to process and make adjustments. If I see a car coming fast down the street, right, and I'm walking towards the street, what am I going to do? Slow down, right? How much time does it actually take to process that? Let's say I saw somebody walking by and they're approaching me as I'm getting to my car. Immediately, there is going to be something that's going to go, okay, like, you know, who is this person? How far are they? I'm going to make a judgment on whether I feel a threat. If I saw a woman with a stroller, am I going to feel the same way as I might see a 6'2" man with a goatee and tattoos, right? Suddenly I feel different. And this is something that is normal. This is something that is natural, because the way the human mind works is we like to put people in categories, right? We become wired, and it's the way that our body, it's the way our mind is going to process these millions of things that are happening at any given time. And that wiring creates a set of systemic thinking errors, right? And the biases that we have, they're learned through culture and experiences, and they're all contextual, right? So if I'm watching, you know, 3 hours of SVU after work, guess what? When I'm in a parking lot downtown, I'm going to think bad stuff's happened, right? I'm going to turn around and think, like, what am I going to think? What's happening? But what we watch, what we consume, what we're exposed to, what we're listening to at work, all of these things have an impact on the way that we think. So when we think of bias, what we need to do is just remember that our brains are naturally seek categorization to help us make sense of the world, and that our categorization produces biases with the intention to allow us to make those judgments more efficiently and quickly and efficiently, right? Sometimes it is the safety thing. So you're going to do it. What's important is that our biases and thoughts and actions, one, to recognize that they aren't intended to judge, disrespect, or harm, but they very well can. If we have seen a disproportionate amount of stories where we do think Black men are violent, guess what? When that person that's walking down the street happens to be a 6'2" Black man, maybe I need to take a moment to be like, okay, is that a differentiating factor, right, in my mind? And what we have to do is be cognizant, understand the media that we're consuming. When we hear news, right, there's so many studies that have been done about when do we when do you hear the ethnicity of if there's like a suspect, right? And depending on the crime, depending on the type of crime, sometimes ethnicity is mentioned, sometimes it is not. And there are biases in reporting. And so what we need to do is be very aware. Your number one tool against falling into your unconscious bias is truly awareness, questioning yourself, thinking about what you're thinking about your thought process. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different types of unconscious bias. So you could really see is how this really plays out. So then there's affinity bias, and that's feeling a connection to those similar to us. My favorite thing about affinity, how many of you guys are sports fans? Okay. I could not care less about sports, but you know what I love? Sports bars. Because you can see people wearing different jerseys and they will love each other and have an immediate camaraderie with each other, cheering on. Everything about that person is great. And they will hate the folks wearing the other ones, right? There is trash talking. There's all sorts of stuff. And it's all based on a team that no one is playing for, right? Nobody's getting a check from this team. Nobody's doing, but it's an affinity. These are my people, right? So affinity bias is just that. We are drawn to people that are like us. Then we have perception bias, right? Stereotypes and assumptions about different groups. I've already talked about, Black males. I can tell you, I have benefited from bias. When I walk into a room, sometimes people think, is she a doctor? Is she, she'll be really good at math. She'll be really smart. Like maybe she's in IT, right? There are all sorts of bias. Sometimes it'll benefit you, and sometimes it really sucks when you're like, no, I'm in HR, right? And then you're like, but perception, it's just that. I see a person and I'm going to make an assumption based on, how they look. And maybe somebody looks really young and you'd be like, oh, this person's pretty inexperienced, right? I'm not looking at the resume. I'm not thinking, but I'm making a snap judgment based on what I'm seeing. Then there's the halo effect, right? Projecting positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them. Have you ever had a person where when everybody talks about them, it's like they walk on water? And they're like, oh, where did you work with them? Oh, well, I've just, I've heard about them through another friend, or I know that. And you just realize that some people get the benefit, or maybe they were on the news. And so they're a trusted news person. Does that mean if they join your organization in a non-related field that they're going to be an all-star? No, but they're familiar and we associate them with all things good. That's the halo effect. And then we have a confirmation bias. How many of you guys have sat on an interview panel? Right? Have you ever walked in when the person goes, you're like, oh, that person's going to be terrible. That person is not. And then they get the job. And you're like, I can't believe they chose it. And all you do is wait for that next year for them to mess up and be like, I told you so. Right? And you are seeking these bad things to happen because you just want to feel right. Right? I was validated. I'm validated in my initial snap judgment of this person. And this is real. And I can tell you as a person in HR who has to overlook, who will sit through multiple interviews, I have to talk to people about this all the time. Is like, when you are on this panel, this is what you are going to be, evaluating people on. And let's make sure that at the end of this process that we continue to support, right? And I shouldn't have to. That should be kind of something that we would imagine would not be the case, but we are humans, right? And to be human is to have fault. So this is just another bias that's very important or to be aware of. So name bias, judging an individual based on their name and its potential origin or background, right? So what it can look like, assuming someone of a particular race or ethnic makeup because of the name on their job application, affecting the view of them and their capabilities as an employee or individual. Let's say there is a resume for a communications position. There you have some qualified folks. You have a recruiter with maybe 2 to 3 years of experience. They're going through it and they're looking at names, and you could see sometimes names, you can see address. There's a John Smith. There's Maggie Jones. And there's a Pavandeep Kaur Gill. And there's a Sean Quinta Anderson. Will those names have any bias when they're looking at them? They might think, hey, Oven might have an accent, right? How well is her English going to be? Sean Quinta, how articulate is she going to be? Is she going to resonate with our folks? These are things that this recruiter isn't trying to do, right? They're not sitting there saying, I'm weeding everybody out. But it's natural when we see things. Or if I see a Hispanic name, like, oh, this is great, this person's bilingual, right? Assumption that, do we even know at this point if they do? But based on that name, I can very easily make some really quick judgment. And this is so prevalent that for most DEI programs, when they start getting implemented, one of the first things that I will say is, let's start with removing names and personal information. No address, no name when people are screening the resume for the first time. And that is to get rid of some of that name bias. Then we have the halo and board effect, right? And this is a shifted perception of a person based on learned information from one incident. The halo effect that we talked about earlier is like one person did one amazing thing in an organization. And then after that, they walk on water. Oh, did you know, Sean launched this program. After that, Sean can have really bad behavior. After that, Sean might be sexually harassing one of his coworkers. But Sean launched that program. Sean's amazing. Really? I don't think Sean's that kind of guy. Sean wouldn't do that, right? And then the horn effect, right? One bad situation. Has anyone ever had this where like one minor bad thing has happened at work, but you never seem to be able to shake it off, right? After that, you're always, that so-and-so, she was late to that client's meeting and, this thing happened. And it could be 5 years later and a million amazing things have happened after that. You will forever have that horn of, and it's something that you're not able to kick. So be careful of these biases. They're very troubling when they happen to you, but also look to make sure that you are not doing that to everybody else. Because again, this is implicit bias. This is not something that anyone is actively trying to do, but it's just something that we tend to do. So when we talk about creating workplace cultures, it's just as important for us to look at our own behaviors, because ultimately it's individuals that make up an organization. So, okay, yeah, like the horn effect, the late thing, you guys could be like, Kevin should not present anymore, right? She shows up late to her own presentation. I was like, but you guys are going to learn something good today. So then we have an attribution bias, right? Stereotype thinking that influences assumptions about people's or groups' ability and character, right? So someone's walking down the hall, they're in a rush, and they knock into you, and maybe, they're like, sorry, or they didn't say it in the way that you think. And I'll tell you, this one I'm guilty of. Oh, that person is so rude, right? That person is just a terrible person. Do I know why they were rushing? Do I know that maybe they have a really urgent call and they don't want to walk around with that horn effect for the next, 3 months for being late to a really important meeting, and that's why? Or maybe they tried to say something and, something happened in the throat and then the elevator caught them, right? There can be a million reasons for that person and for that one slightly negative thing to happen. But when we start attributing characteristics, this is a mean person, right? That was an unfortunate act, but does that really reflect on the type of person it is? And it's really making sure that we're not attributing abilities and character and making value judgments about people on something that might not warrant that. And so the last is affinity bias. Oh, we already talked about this, so we are good. But affinity bias can also be, when you go to a conference and you don't have any of your coworkers with you. as women, I know a lot of times, sometimes just kind of look and be like, oh, it looks kind of like friendly and like, okay, maybe I can, go sit over there. The chances of me just seeking out some random male, probably not as likely, right? Unless a conversation broke out, something like that. Ethnic, right? Sometimes I'll walk in and I'll be like, oh, there's a, Indian chick sitting over there. Maybe I'll just walk around there, only because there's a level of comfort, right? There's a level of, oh, I feel like some sort of affinity. Maybe it's an age thing. It could be a lot of different factors, but a lot of times this is just something that we do, but we're not doing it actively, but it's just a matter of comfort. How are we doing on time? What time is it?
11:20,
11:20. And what time? How much time do we have?
12. So
Well, okay. So trusted connectivity, and I'm going to kind of fast forward through this, but I want you to close your eyes. And for those of you guys that are visual, you can also write down what's a thing, but for a brief second, a couple of seconds, close your eyes. And I want you to think of the people, not immediate family members, that you consider to be your tribe. Who are the 10 most trusted people in your life that you feel you could count on, that you feel will be there for you and are super important to everything you do? Now, open your eyes. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, I want you to just write down some of the names. You could give initials, you can give whatever. That's really for you to think about. That's not. Yeah, try not to do, your immediate family members or something like that, but just who are the people that, they're your go-tos in life. About 30 more seconds. For those of you that are done, consider yourself very lucky to have a tribe that is strong. Next to the names, I want you to just draw a line, right? So we're going to make like a little spreadsheet. And I want you to add their gender. Just add that as a data element. Once you guys look up at me, then I'll know that you guys are right. Okay. Now I want you to add a race and ethnicity. Now let's add sexuality. Now let's add disability. All right, this is a big piece of paper. We could do education level. And I'm just going to keep you naming off the things because you don't have to finish this. So this is an activity that I just want you to think through. We can add socioeconomic status. We can add marital status. What do you notice? Similar, right? At one point, we start looking at who our circles are, who are the people that we are closest to. We share a lot in common. Does that mean that your trusted 10 are bad? Absolutely not. That's your tribe. But what I will do is challenge you to step outside of your comfort zone, your known. And if you see that there is a big gap in any of those, you might want to consider widening your circle. You might want to consider spending a little bit more time getting to know people that aren't exactly like you, because having those relationships will enrich your life. Having those relationships will expand your perspective. It will help you both in creating the type of community that we all want to live in. So. Okay. So we talked about the different types of biases. We talked about how it's a natural human phenomenon, but now we need to think about what can we do, right? And so I really like this because it reminds me, I like that it's implicit, right? And so the first thing is introspection, right? Explore and identify your own prejudices. Today you're taking this first step, right? You're in this class. How many of you guys have heard of the Harvard IAT test? Okay, fascinating tests. And I will, this time I'll actually do it. I'm gonna send you my presentation and I'm gonna follow up with a link to the IAT tests. And what they are is, and this is for you. I hate the idea of having to take something and then, does this mean that I am racist or does this mean that I am sexist? I don't care about that, but it's about your self-learning, discovery, and introspection. And you can take this test and what they'll do is they'll just show you images of random things and what your mind associates, right? Is good, bad, danger, not danger. And and you're not thinking about it. I mean, the idea is speed, right? You go through it, you process it, and you take it. And it is fascinating what you will learn about yourself. Things, blind spots that you didn't even think you had, you could do. And the purpose of those tests, it was again, not to shame, but to provide introspection. So we start rethinking and being more aware of how we think. So the second is mindfulness, right? And when I was talking earlier about the situation of you walking down the street, right? Another one actually I like to use a lot of the time is elevators. Men, how many times do you like to walk into an elevator when there's only one woman in there? You don't, right? How does it make you feel? Will anybody be courageous? Question? Yes. How do men feel when they walk into an elevator when there's just a single woman in there? Okay. Uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, right? Do you want to get perceived as a threat? What happens when you see her body, language just kind of go to the corner and just that makes you feel like a little bit of a creep, right? Did you do anything to warrant that? Not necessarily, right? Does the woman want you to feel bad? Probably not. It's just natural, right? It's things everything. So when you're in that moment, I can take a second to be mindful and say, hi, how are you? And sometimes that's enough to break the ice. And we're both a lot more comfortable, right? So introspect, know your biases, know your blind spots, and then be mindful and think, how can I break this home? It'll likely be beneficial to both people in that situation. The third is perspective taking, right? Consider experiences from the point of view of the person being stereotyped. And that's why I wanted to use this example. Like as a woman, we could say, hey, there's enough acts of violence against women that I know why I'm thinking that. And guess what? It's self-preservation at this point. But think for a second what it would feel like to be that man walking into that same situation, right? And that perspective taking might help me be more mindful. And it could be a better outcome, like I said, for both. The other is learning to slow down, right? Before interacting with people with certain groups, pause and reflect to reduce that reflexive action. Implicit bias is what causes our actions, right? Our automatic reflexes. If we slow down and we don't make such quick judgments and we don't try to take such quick action, we could probably have very, very different outcomes in situations that are minor. And also let's go to officer involved shootings. But I mean, it can get extrapolated, right? Taking a second to step back. And anybody, I am very, supportive of police departments and I have helped with police officer training as well. So it's one of those things that like, sometimes we just think, oh no, this isn't, of course people are thinking before they act. We are humans and it doesn't matter how much training you've received and you're going to do X, Y, Z. When a person feels a threat, right, then they're going to react. What we need to be conscious of is what do we perceive as a threat? Is a person being somewhere? Is that threat enough? Right? So slow down. Don't be too quick to judge and act. The next is individuation. And that's evaluating people based on their personal characteristics rather than those groups. And this could include connecting over shared. So all the biases that we talked about before, just know that the person standing in front of you is more than an Indian female in this age group, and that there's a lot more to me as a person, and I'm not necessarily going to be like every other Indian girl you meet of this age group, right? So we're all individuals. We all have different experiences. We know this, but when you go out into the world, we will sometimes forget this. And so, you know, that's just something to be really mindful of. The next is checking your messaging, right? A lot of people say, you know, as opposed to saying things like, we don't see color, or, you know, we use statements that welcome and embrace multiculturalism and other differences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that example later, so I'm going to leave it at that. The next is institutionalizing fairness. Support a culture of diversity and inclusion at the organizational level. And this could include using an equity lens to identify your group's blind spots, or reviewing the images in your office to see if they further or undercut stereotypes, right? So that's why you started seeing formalization in organizations, right? They just kind of said like, hey, we kind of talk about culture, you know, we'll say, oh, we want a positive work culture. But what are the steps that we're doing to create that culture, right? So institutionalize fairness. Put this when we're thinking of our outreach materials. Make sure that we're being inclusive. So the people that are on the brochures that we're sending out look like the people that we're serving. Right? If we have a 55% Hispanic population, I can speak for Kern County Healthcare, right? And the pictures on every single one of our brochures don't reflect that, we're doing something wrong. And so make sure that when we're developing materials, we're doing all these things that you see that we're institutionalizing the fairness, and we're making sure that everybody feels a part, and that we're applying the proper lenses when we're developing materials. And the last is take two, and that is resisting implicit bias is lifelong work. Like I told you, I've been doing trainings for over 20 years related to, and they've been branded as different things right now. DEI is what we talk about, but it's really about understanding that this is a lifelong process, and no one's ever going to be an expert who's going to overcome it. Every single day, I am still dealing with, oh, did I react right to that? Or why did I take what somebody said so offensively, right? What am I associating with in my past that made me react the way that I did? So this is lifelong work, and then this is your first day on your journey for those who this is their first training of how to be more aware. And most importantly, if you have done this today, please share, right? Share this information with others to where maybe they want to learn a little bit more about it. The next thing we're going to talk about is microaggressions, right? So what's aggression? Like if I was going to be aggressive and say, somebody give me an answer, what might I do? Yell, right? Yell, bang on your desk, grab something, demand it, right? So microaggressions refer to the normalization of commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity, whether intentional or unintentional. So again, remember, it is not always intentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudicial slights and insults towards culturally marginalized groups. While microaggressions can be seen as innocent, harmless comments, they reinforce stereotypes and are a form of discrimination. Usually in the workplace, you see slightly less super hostile, and I've also done workplace investigations for a long time. You don't see as much, physical altercation or really, really explicit racism or sexism. But what you do see are a lot of microaggressions that ultimately create a very negative environment. So this is another video that I like.
Hi there. Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh my God. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Well,
Well, my great grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
I'm Shastina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
Where are you from?
No, I'm still American.
Really? You're Native American.
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Double, toil and trouble. Find a good fish at the river. Bloody hell. Cheerio. I think your people's fish and chips are amazing. Really? Where? Must be a Korean thing.
Right, so this video says everything a lot better than I could, but how many of you guys have ever been in that experience where like, you're just like, did that just happen? Right, did that person really just say that? And you know they're not meaning it, right? You know that they're not trying to go out of their way to be insulting, but you're just like, wow, like how, what do I even say? And I can't tell you how many times that, you know, I have been in a situation like that. And so I love this video because it's a playful way of illustrating something that is far too common. And that's another one that I encourage you to share out. So for microaggressions, okay, so there's 3 types of microaggressions. I'm actually going to start on the bottom, which is micro invalidations, right? And these refer to the subtle exclusion or negation of one's feelings and or experiential reality related to that person's identity. So, like the video, repeatedly ask something like, where were they born? Right? Where, when he asked her, you know, oh, where are you from, right? She's not American. She was born in Orange County. She's over there, but I am looking at you and you're from somewhere else. Right. And when he was asked about his own, he was like, oh yeah, I'm from here. I'm American. And that is the reality. Now, was he trying to, you know, invalidate her? Probably not. Right. But did it not have that effect? And so that's where, when it comes to implicit bias, microaggression, all this, it's really about awareness, because the more aware we are, the less likely we are to do something like that. And then there's micro insults, right? And these refer to subtle, insensitive comments and our behaviors, often unconscious, related to a person's identity. So an example here is helping, right, in quotes, a wheelchair user without asking if they would like assistance. What does that communicate? If I was walking down the street and are you gonna grab, you know, something from me or push me to help me walk? Right? No. When you see a person, consent is just as important for a person that is in a wheelchair, a person for any sort of disability, right? Consent is important for every human being. But sometimes, even when we're thinking we are being helpful, right? We're thinking we're doing something good, we will act in a way that really invalidates or insults another person. And then there's micro assaults, right? So these are basically kind of raising in intensity. And so those refer to conscious and intentionally biased discriminatory comments and or behaviors related to a person's identity, right? Using racial slurring. It doesn't always have to be, you know, one of the hard hitting words, but it could just be like, oh, yeah, oh, you see that outburst. How is that surprising? Right? There's ways of saying things without even having to be explicitly derogatory, but every person knows exactly what you're alluding to, right? Denying accommodations for a trans person. So let's, you know, for in healthcare, we will all say, like, if a person has a preferred pronoun, I know I'm supposed to ask this question, but I think it's bullshit. And I don't think that I should have to, because I'm sorry, you're a man or you're a woman. And if you're not one of those, then, you know, that's just all this neoliberal new age stuff, right? I can have that attitude toward it, but as my job is to collect that that micro assault might be me saying, I'm not gonna ask it, right? I'm not even gonna acknowledge this as a question because based on my own feelings, based on my own, bias and truly at this point, we're discriminating, but I'm acting upon my feelings, negatively. Now, here are some more examples, of what micro assaults, micro insults, and invalidations could look like, right? So I think we already talked about the second one, the I don't see color, right? How many people have heard somebody goes, oh, well, yeah, this discrimination, oh, I don't see color. How many have heard that actually been said? Right? Who here physically does not see color? Anybody that's colorblind in the room, right? You're still going to see shades. You're still going to see variations. When we say things like, I don't see color, what you're saying is, I am not acknowledging that your color is a reality, right? And that my color, it's true, it's there. Now, the question is, do we treat people differently based on color? That's the issue, right? Not seeing it. So when we say things like that, and I can't tell you again how many times in leadership when you're saying, oh, this is what we need to change in the interviewing process, and this is what we need. Oh, I think now we're starting to go overboard. And when I do this, I don't see, these things. To me, that's usually my red flag that we need that action more than anything. Because when we say things like that, what we're really saying is, I don't want to address this. I do not want to have to address that there may be differences based on what a person is seeing, right? I believe that the most qualified person should get the job. This one kills me because whether it's a person, maybe it's their color, maybe it's their age, right? Oh, well, look, that person's young. Why would they be a director at this thing, right? I'm looking at you and I'm saying it's not your skills, it's not your experiences, it's not your resume that got you that job. But there had to be another factor related to your identity, right, that got you into this position. So there is just a ton. And then the last one is important too, because it's dismissing people who bring up race in the workplace or in the classroom, right? Hidden message, leave your cultural baggage outside. Don't want to entertain this conversation because I'm tired about hearing about race and all of these. And you know what? If you're tired of hearing about sexism, you're tired of hearing about racism, imagine being on the receiving end, right? Imagine experiencing that on a daily basis. And so until we get to a point where we have better environments for everyone, we're going to need to continue to talk about all of these issues. Did I skip one? No. Okay. So what do we do, right? So there's a part of me that goes, oh man, so we're all a bunch of really biased people. And then we could all be, sometimes not so great at work and in our interactions, right? Is all lost? Absolutely not. Because we're here today, we're having this conversation. And I fundamentally believe that the majority of the people in this world are good. Sometimes we can be misguided. Sometimes we can be stuck in a what do they call the echo chambers, right? One of the things actually that I didn't talk about earlier because I was trying to rush through and make up for time was the messages that we receive, right? How many of you guys watch your news on TV? How many read? How many scroll through their phones and then read, right? What does AI do for us? It picks up the types of articles we're looking for, and then it sends you recommended reading, right? So I've read one article, and I don't know, I'm not going to choose a hot topic because that can always get controversial, but whatever the hot topic is, then I'm going to keep getting articles that are going to reinforce that same mindset. And at one point, my phone is sending me these messages, and then that's attached to my Google, which is on my desktop computer. So maybe when I'm at work and I'm listening to something, that's going to be along, right? When we're listening to our music, what are your recommended things, right? So they're going to give you music that sounds like the music that you're listening to. We are becoming exposed to less and less because now everything is customized and filtered to what you want to hear. And so it's very easy to just get stuck in that saying, and your worldview is now narrowed to your own biases. And are you really then understanding like the perspectives of what's really going on? I'm a person, I love to be contrarian. So I might, follow X news thing, but I will watch the other side for certain because I want to hear what's going on. Why do people think a certain way, right? And I'll watch the mainstream news that I'm watching and go, what is this? And I might watch international news to see what are the perspectives of other people that are looking at us, right? And it's important to do that because it checks our world filters. And we want to make sure that we don't start getting so much information filtered to us that we lose sight and perspective, just a wider perspective of what's going on. So what can we do, right? Let's take action. Let's operationalize equity. The number one thing you could do is engage, train, and empower your workforce. Action starts from within. When we're talking about within an organization, we're talking about your work culture, right? You spend 40 hours a week. If you're working a regular full-time, you're spending 40 hours a week. Sometimes we spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our families. Your workplace culture matters. How we treat each other matters. How we treat each other in the workplace has an impact on the clients that we serve. How we serve our clients is informed by our personal biases and all of these. So this is something that is important, both internal, external, and in your community. So starting is really empowering your workforce, empowering yourself with knowledge. And that way we can all act different, right? Second, let's examine your workforce, including leadership, and compare against the communities your organization serves, right? When we are looking at organizations, we should reflect the communities that we serve. If you look at the top leadership levels and you're not seeing that diversity, then we need to start saying, what are we doing wrong? Because if this is the population we're serving, and this is the population of Kern County, why don't we look more like what our demographic breakdown is? Now, does that mean you say, oh, well, let's give this person out of their job? No, but when that next opportunity becomes available, what are we doing as an organization to make sure that we are investing in our employees, training and developing them? So by the time another opportunity comes forward, we have people of multiple diverse backgrounds vying for that same position, right? And remember, that diversity does not mean, okay, we're talking about somebody who is an ethnic minority, or we're talking, but that diversity, and that's important, right? Representation is important, but it's about those experiences. And are we really capturing the whole person, everything that we need, and what can they bring into those roles? So then disaggregating programmatic data by race and ethnicity to see whether your impact is equitable. Closely examine and reflect as to why. What I always say is an organization's priorities are most reflected by its budget. As the former director of DEI for the county, you know what I didn't receive? Was my own budget. What does that tell me? Right? At that point, I thought, is this the role for me? Right? Because if you're not going to put a dollar amount to say that we are willing to invest in this, then it should be an alarm of this isn't important. When we're looking at our clientele, if all our dollars are going to a particular area, right? We might need to look at it and say, what's going on here? Like, why is it concentrated in this area? Who, is it the population, or where are blind spots? Where else do we need to do? So disaggregating data, and here actually I only say race and ethnicity, but we're in Kern County, right? How about rural versus Bakersfield? Huge disparities, right? Between how many dollars, how many resources can go. We're gonna look for impact, and impact is the most important. But disaggregate that data to make sure that there's not other blind spots that need to be addressed. And then we need to look at our community engagement strategy on an ongoing basis, right? who are your stakeholders? Who are your relevant stakeholders group? Who are your trusted messengers? A lot of time with stakeholders and having worked majority of my time in Kern County, after a while, you start seeing the same people in the room, right? It's like, oh, this is a representative of this group and this is this agency's person, and which is great because it's nice to have like knowledge, but we need to not fall into the trap of, oh, this is, our standing committee and these are the people that have always been in it. Constantly look at that and say, what is changing? What are new programs? What are new populations? What are emerging populations? Where do we need representation from? It needs to be ongoing. And, we're all short staffed. We're all, always trying to just balance a million things, but it's taking the time to be conscious and really looking at our community engagements, our stakeholders groups, and to make sure that we have trusted messengers in every community. Right now, there's so much more of this peer-to-peer help. Why do you think peer-to-peer became so important when it came to like substance abuse counseling and incarcerated populations, homeless population? Because of what? Relatability, right? And that relatability translated into impact. So we need to look at our trusted messengers. We need to say, who are we having perform this work to make sure that we can have impact? And have we adjusted to the changing demographics in our area? As populations change, when I grew up, I was one of, I think, 10 Indian kids in my entire school. We started the first club. I was a de facto translator for the school. And then sometimes Bakersfield City School District, who my mom worked for as an interpreter, would call and they would call my school to see if I could help translate. That's that's the world that I grew up in, right? And now I have people that, have immigrated more recently. They're like, oh my God, like this is totally different. You guys grew up with so many Punjabi people. And I'm like, no, I spent my entire life with other people being like, how come you don't speak Spanish? And I was like, oh, because I'm Punjabi. Like it's different. Now everyone knows what that was. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, not so much the case. So just understand that populations will change and that we have to change the way that we work to make sure that we're going to be effective in our service. So I'm going to leave you with this. And these are what we like to think of signature traits of an inclusive leader. And each and every single one of you guys are leaders because every day what you're doing in your organization, in your community, to the people that you serve, you are all leaders. And these are the 6 traits that I think will help you, your organization, and your clients and your community. One is commitment, because staying the course is hard. It's very easy to get discouraged. Having done this for as long as I have in multiple organizations, and what I've been happy is even in times where I was very frustrated and said, oh, we could do better, I was still able to lead those organizations with impact. So commitment is key. 2 is courage, because talking about imperfections involves personal risk taking, right? 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have made some of the comments that I made today during this training about whether I was assigned a budget or, what was going on. But as we grow, as circumstances change, sometimes you can have a little bit more courage to say, hey, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's do that. And this is not always easy. And it takes courage to speak up in the workplace, but understand where your resources are and help be that voice. Because if nobody has courage to address or acknowledge that there's issues, there's no way that we're going to create better organizations. Cognizance, because bias is the leader's Achilles heel. Sometimes we start thinking like, oh, okay, I'm a DEI leader and I don't have any of this. It's always being cognizant that, like I talked about earlier, this is an ongoing journey. You're going to be doing this throughout your entire life. Stay alert, stay informed, and always know that we are all works in progress. Sometimes it's very easy to get on a soapbox and think that you walk on water. And I'll tell you, 5 years later, somebody's going to walk up to you and they're going to tell you something that you said, how you impacted them when you had no idea. And you're going to say, wow, I'm a jackass. And that's what the cognizance, is about. Curiosity. Because different ideas and experiences enable growth. When we're talking about the trusted 10, stay curious. Expand your knowledge. Don't watch the same news. Don't read the same articles. Expand your perspectives. And so stay curious. If you like this DEI training, learn more about it. Look for other opportunities. Join the movement is what I like to say is if you want to do work in Kern County, there's a DEI board with the homeless collaborative, right? There are multiple ways for you to serve and better our community. Get involved, stay curious. Cultural intelligence, because not everyone sees the world through the same cultural frame, understands that all cultures are different. They have different values. How do you connect? How do you provide culturally competent or tailored assistance to your clientele? And then the last, which might be the absolute most important, is collaboration, because a diverse thinking team is greater than the sum of parts. Look at every single person around you, even the person that might be naysaying what you're thinking, because you will learn from what their hesitations are. Because for the most part, and we like to think that we are all extremely good human beings, but something has happened. We have been exposed to something where our thinking sometimes might go astray. But the more we collaborate, the more we interact, rather than falling into what is our known, stay curious, collaborate, look at other agencies that are doing the work that you are. It's not always competition. Sometimes it's sharing best practices. It's doing what's right. But these are the 6 signature traits for success. Thank you. Do we have time for any questions or anything like that? Or
Yeah,
okay.
good time.
Anybody want to talk? Action items that you think you might want to do? Are you guys done and ready for lunch? Well, it's a wrap then. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let's go on one more hand. That was awesome. And great. Just gotta slow down, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. Slow down. If we can make quick reactions, I think we just saw that in the news like 2 days ago, right? Quick reaction, snap reaction, right? And might not always be the right thing. And so that's the biggest thing I think I've had to learn is to slow down. Hey, what's really going on? Right? And I remember being in the seminar where he illustrated this, where he was up there talking. In the middle of his talk, a guy got up out of his chair and walked behind him, and then went and sat down on the other side. And then he just asked the audience, "Hey, what's just happened here?" I said, "Man, that guy was just a real jerk." People said, "That guy's just a jerk. He got up in the middle of the talk. He was a big distraction. He was selfish. They're naming off all these things." And he said, "Actually, here's what happened. He got up out of that chair, walked across the stage and sat down. Everything else you made up, right?" And so it's because we jump to those quick conclusions. And so we have to, anyway, thank you for that. It was a great reminder. And so we are done. We are finished. Right, Cassie? So it's they're bringing sandwiches from Costco. So if you want to stick around, lunch will be here shortly. There's beverages back there. Otherwise, if you have other lunch plans, you are dismissed. And then one more thing, Cassie's got something.
Yeah, thanks for our training. Can you email me at info or you want to jot down? Yes. Info at bkrhc.org. And just tell me your name and ask which ones I'm missing. So ask that, and then also if you're planning on coming to the graduation and you did not RSVP this morning when we signed you in, email me that too and let me know. you or even your coworkers, if you guys will be coming that aren't here today, and you know that they will be wanting to come, tell them to email me, or if you could speak for them, email me their name and their email address too, because I'll be sending out information soon.
Can you say your email?
Info, INFO, at B, like boy, KRHC.org.
Well, thank you, Casey. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.